do we have time now on the agenda for enlace?
Thank you.
If we could have you, actually, come on up to the front here.
Is there room for 4 of us to be up there?
Yeah, of course. Here,
Alright.
here, I'll get, yeah. There's room for all of you. Oh, I'm sorry, Keith. I want to take it.
Thank you all for having us today. My name is Jamie Trinkle. I work with Enlace, which convenes the National Private Prison Divestment Campaign, as well as a local coalition here in Portland that's asking the city of Portland to publicly divest from private prisons and their major investors. So first of all, I'll explain why divestment is important. The 2 largest private prison companies, Corrections Corporation of America and GEO Group, rely on financing from public institutions like the city of Portland to lobby for contracts and laws that disproportionately impact communities of color and that result in massive immigrant detention. And investors, like the city of Portland, share responsibility for CCA and GEO Group's efforts to create felons out of our community members and to create profits and dollar signs over the heads of our community members. Our coalition is a broad one, includes over a dozen organizations here in Portland, including the American Friends Service Community, CASA Oregon, Center for Intercultural Organizing, Enlace, the Interfaith Movement for Immigrant Justice, the National Lawyers Guild Lewis and Clark Chapter, Oregon Dream Activists, Partnership for Safety and Justice, Portland Association of Teachers, Portland Campaign to End the New Jim Crow, Portland Central America Solidarity Committee, Portland Job with Justice, Race Talks, Rural Organizing Project, SCIU 49, Urban League, and BOES. As you can see, this is an issue that's important to many Portlanders and many different facets of the Portland community. Private prisons and their shareholders are dependent on putting our community members behind bars for longer periods of time. The better, the more profits they make. In the 1990s, their efforts to lobby focused on longer sentencing laws, which decimated Black and brown communities across the country. Through their participation in ALEC, they got forward truth in sentencing laws, mandatory minimums, and 3 strikes laws. Since in the 2000s, they focused mainly on immigration as their biggest growth market. Since 2004, their lobbying money doubled, basically. They've spent $45 million on lobbying and campaign contributions on our federal government in the last decade, and it's been enormously successful. In that time, they've gotten an immigrant detention bed mandate, so that 34,000 immigrants are mandated by Congress to be detained each night. The Secure Communities Program roped up hundreds of thousands of immigrants, to the point where we had record-breaking months of deportations and detention deportations in 2012 and 2013. And we also now see an increase in criminal prosecutions. The leading federal prosecution now is for illegal entry and illegal re-entry, so that now more than half of people entering federal prison are Latino. And they're held there for between 30 days and up to 20 years for the crimes of illegal entry and illegal re-entry. This has led to more than $20 billion in profits for the private prison industry in that time. The impact on the Portland community is huge. Nearly 4,000 immigrants are picked up each year in Portland, and all of those that are held for over 12 hours are immediately shipped up to a private prison in Tacoma. That's the GEO Group's Northwest Detention Center, which you may have heard of recently in the news when detainees there went on hunger strike for over 2 months to protest the abysmal conditions inside, continued deportations, and their ironic forced use of labor. They're paid $1 a day. Usually they're picked up because they're not legally in the country and can't legally work, but then they're put into an immigrant detention center and forced to work for $1 a day. All of that is so that GEO can make a profit. And financially, our city is directly tied to private prisons. We have $73 million of city money invested in major private prison investors. These major investors are Wells Fargo, JP Morgan Chase, and the Bank of New York Mellon. This may seem like an attenuated connection, but I can assure you it's not. Wells Fargo has been a major supporter of private prisons. They have extended nearly $1 billion in credit to the biggest private prison company in the U.S., CCA. JP Morgan Chase has shared lobbyists with Corrections Corporation of America just last year. These lobbyists were engaged in lobbying around comprehensive immigration reform, as well as appropriations bill spending for increased immigration enforcement and other things like that. And they've also been active as shareholders and have made the private prison industry worse and less accountable to the public. So they have voted against acts that would increase access to like lobbying information, how CCA and GEO actually lobby, and shut down resolutions that would have actually created some sort of recourse for folks that are sexually assaulted within these private prison facilities. So today we're here to ask that the Human Rights Commission write a letter to the City of Portland in support of our efforts, calling for them to divest from private prisons and major investors. We have a draft resolution that I believe you all have in your packets today that we've written up, and that we would like the city to move on. And so Isabel, speak next, Isabel Sheridan.
I do have copies. I'm sorry, I didn't know how many people were on the commission, so I don't have enough for everyone, but there's like 8 or 9, slightly amended. Good afternoon. I am representing an action group of First Unitarian Church in Portland. The group is called Ending the New Jim Crow, Healing the Justice System Action Group. It's a long name because it's a big issue. Our mission is to end the mass incarceration of millions of people, both citizens and non-citizens in this country. Over the last 35 years, these people have been the victims of a web of federal laws, biased policing, and court decisions that have decimated communities of color. They've also decimated individual families who are white, but our focus is on how it has been disproportionately affecting communities of color and individuals of color. Portland residents are unfortunately well represented in this population. I have chosen to use my time to go to the source of our national discussion on the injustice of mass incarceration, Michelle Alexander. In The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colorblindness, she writes, there is also the private sector investment to consider. Prisons are big business and have become deeply entrenched in America's economic and political system. Rich and powerful people, including the former Vice President Dick Cheney, have invested millions in private prisons. They are deeply interested in expanding the market, increasing the supply of prisoners, not eliminating the pool of people who can be held captive for a profit. The 2005 annual report for the Corrections Corporation of America explained the vested interests of private prisons matter-of-factly in a filing with the Securities and Exchange Commission. Our growth is generally dependent upon our ability to obtain new contracts to develop and manage new correctional and detention facilities. This possible growth depends on a number of factors we cannot control, including crime rates and sentencing patterns in various jurisdictions and acceptance of privatization. The demand for our facilities and services could be adversely affected by the relaxation of enforcement efforts, leniency in conviction and enforcement practices, or through the decriminalization of certain activities that are currently proscribed by our criminal laws. For instance, any changes with respect to drugs and controlled substances or illegal immigration could affect the number of persons arrested, convicted, and sentenced, thereby potentially reducing demand for correctional facilities to house them. That's pages 230 and 231 in Alexander's book. They're not just kind of backing into this. They're really, really doing it on purpose. Nothing could slow the growth of the private prison industry more quickly than simply divesting in those companies. We know it works. No money, no lobbying. No lobbying, no stopping the movement, and it is a movement to end mass incarceration. I just saw Bell the other night. We're doing the same stuff. We just don't throw people overboard from slave ships that are designed not to be able to hold them, and not stopping for 8 port cities to get water, and then saying they had to get thrown overboard so that that company could get the insurance money. We're not doing anything quite that exotically flagrant, but we're doing it just the same, yet again. Respectfully submitted.
Sarah Swetzoff will also testify.
Hi, I'm Sarah. I'm with the Student Union at Portland State University, which currently represents about 1,000 students. But I feel pretty confident today speaking on behalf of the vast majority of Portland State University students. This year, as a journalist communicating with many different groups, I encountered so much interest in following the money and divesting from private prisons that I reached out to Enlace to find out more about their campaign work so that I could connect students with those resources. So on such short notice of this meeting, I wasn't able to do an official poll of all the student groups that I'm in touch with or that may be interested, but I would say just from my experience this year as a student, it's difficult to know where to even start summarizing the obvious student support for divestment from the private prison industry and the problems of mandatory incarceration legislation. It's so prevalent that it feels like it's practically unanimous on campus. All 3 slates that recently ran for student government brought up the connection with declining university funding, that connection with mandatory sentencing and the money that's been drained away from the university system since the early 90s. One slate specifically highlighted the prison pipeline, and that was a cornerstone of their conversations with students and their presence in the park blocks, publicly campaigning. And that group had the official sponsorship of United Indian Students in Higher Education. The indigenous population of this region is very much affected by incarceration policies. Pam Campos, who is our student trustee on the new board of trustees, is an outspoken advocate for the rights of undocumented people in the United States. And she has also talked about incarceration policy and highlighted Oregon's support of the private prison industry and sending undocumented people to the Northwest Detention Center. So since the contract negotiations this year, students are talking a lot more about money, and they're noticing that the reason why we don't have as much money for the universities as we could is because of incarceration policy. For example, when we had a panel organized by Jobs with Justice, we heard Gabby Williamson, Representative Gabby Williamson, talked about our budget issues. So I think, if you were to poll any student on campus, and any student who's even marginally politically involved on campus, and poll them on their thoughts on this issue, it would be one of the first things that they would mention to you. Like Michelle Alexander's book is quickly becoming a Bible to the activists of our generation. This is really kind of common knowledge stuff, and the student body hopes to, I think, submit a resolution for the university to divest this coming year. So we hope to follow in the footsteps of the city.
Hi, my name is Crystal Contreras. I'm a board member of the Portland Central America Solidarity Committee. Since 1979, our group has worked with people throughout the Americas, organizing against the harmful effects that the United States government continues to have abroad. U.S. economic and interventionist policies, one of the root causes of immigration, forcing people to leave their countries in order to look for opportunities and safety here in the United States. Then, once they arrive, they are subjected to oppressive police and tactics that are done in the name of public safety, when studies have shown that there is no connection between high levels of immigration and high levels of crime. My own family has experienced these brutal police methods because in May of 2010, the police conducted a raid at my aunt's home, bursting in when my 12-year-old cousin was playing video games after school. They made him lay face down on the floor of the living room with a gun to his head while they ripped through the house, tearing open mattresses and destroying the wealth that my aunt has worked so hard to build since she came here from Mexico. And even though this happened in a town about 8 hours south of here, that's not too far from where we are now, and these things are happening every day. It seems like this has become normal now thanks to the war on drugs, which is fueled by private prison companies and their need to fill quotas. Because these companies have pushed for harsher sentencing and criminalization, police forces are using these policies to justify their use of military weapons and tactics, which terrorizes people instead of keeping them safe. Divesting from Wells Fargo would weaken the hold that private prisons have in our communities, creating environments free from the threat of a militarized police force. Portland is rated one of the most livable cities in the nation and sets a standard and a model for other urban centers to aspire to. Taking the lead on divestment from private prisons will show the world that in order for a city to be truly livable, it must consider human rights at all levels of its operations.
Any questions?
What is, are you working on a timeline, or do you have any deadlines coming up?
Well, we would like a letter as soon as possible, if that is possible, from the Human Rights Commission. We've been in conversation with the City Council for over, I believe, a year now, and have been trying to move this forward. It's gotten a little bit waylaid by the Commissioner Novick passed the Do Not Buy Walmart thing last October, and then unfortunately that has led to a kind of long bureaucratic process, which the city is saying, oh, now we've got a process in place, please, just fit within that, wait till we finally have a committee set up that you can make an ask of that too. A committee doesn't exist yet. We're looking for a letter would be helpful either in showing that future committee, this is an important issue to the Human Rights Commission and obviously, and then also if we continue with our process in City Council.
Do you have any specific commissioners that you've been in touch with at City Council, or are you working with?
We've mainly focused on Commissioner Novick.
Okay.
Can I just clarify that year-long conversation was regarding specifically this resolution or something like this?
Something like it. This resolution is informed by more recent conversations with the Treasury Department, and so that it's something that would actually be implementable.
Can I ask one more follow-up? I know you're reading, but so I noticed that your asks are kind of twofold. I see the portfolio screen and a couple of other requests in relation to that, and then there's an advocacy request. So part of that assessment you've done and come to it, I'm thinking it sounds like, is that both of those things at once are attainable right now?
Yes.
I have a question about the numbers that you talked about and the numbers that you have in here regarding the city's actual investment.
Mm-hmm.
So when you talk about the city currently owns about 65 million private business investor securities, and you mentioned a number that was 73 million. So is your information based on public information based on the city's portfolio then?
Yes.
These private prisons that exist, are they counties, run by the county, are they the county, the city, the state?
So the immigrant detention centers that are private are all contracted with the federal government. And some of those are actually contracted with, enter into intergovernmental agreements with the city so that they can avoid going through federal processes like EPA and other things like that, so they can kind of avoid federal regulation. Those are all contracted directly with federal agencies. And then we don't have any private prisons within Oregon, thankfully. But then if we look to California, they have a lot of private prisons that contract directly with the state. And then they're also looking, what's going on in California. Another area of private prison expansion might be contracted with county jails as they try and push inmates out of state facilities, state prisons under a Supreme Court order, and so they'll just shift them into, instead of releasing these people, they'll just shift them into county jails and they can get prison contracts set up.
So have you thought about that approach in the city, about engaging in that kind of practice here, or creating private prisons here in Portland?
I think we're safe for private prisons here. AFSCME has done a really incredible job within the state of Oregon to make sure that private prisons don't come into our prison state because they're horrible for their workers.
I would, just one last note, just suggest that you try to keep that in your thoughts. Because I used to work in the jails, I was a corrections deputy for 6 years, and when I was there, privatization was a big topic. And so I'm sure it's still out there. And I hate to see that happen here anymore, so.
Any last questions before we wrap? Is there a motion for action at this time?
I think it would be appropriate to assign an action minutes, so you might ask for a volunteer.
Anyone specifically would like to serve as the action lead for this? People? Okay.
So Kate's going to be your contact on the Human Rights Commission, and so if you have any contact information, then you should give it to Kate. And then what we will do is determine as a commission whether or not we're going to be able to do what you're asking and the time frame to do that. So it could happen anytime between now and our next meeting, or it could happen just right after our next meeting.
Are we asking for a specific motion, also to give some direction on, because what I heard was a letter directed to the city council of support for the effort?
Support for the effort or specifically support for the letter resolution?
Yeah, support for what they're,
Let's vote.
Can
The
I-
letter and the endorsement.
Austin is doing.
Sorry, I think it might carry more weight to reference the resolution, but also to extend beyond that in case this comes into question, so that we still are advocating and support if we're able to do that.
Yep. So if you feel that's appropriate, then
Are you going to make the motion?
I make a motion that Kate Laura is the action lead for creating a letter of support for Enlace's effort to bring forward the city council this draft ordinance and to support their efforts in helping ensure the city of Portland is divested from the private prison complex.
second.
I have a question. Is it entirely in Los Angeles?
No.
I didn't think so. So I heard
Enlace is the lead group.
coalition.
We're the lead, yes, we're the lead group.
The coalition led by Enlace.
So I move for Alan's motion as amended to move forward for a motion.
All of those in favor?
Aye.
All of those opposed? Any abstentions?
Damon, are you going to vote or?